From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Historic highs behind a union win for better pay in Wichita that may have implications throughout the state. Plus, crossing the aisle in support of the candidates for Attorney General and Governor, the reasons why. And they're off and running all over the state, that is. This week, the target, closing Kansas schools in the face of the pandemic. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Placing the first legal bet on sports in the state of Kansas. It's a moment many have been waiting for a long time. We'll get to all those other stories we headlined in a moment, but we wanted to talk about what everybody else is talking about this week as the books open for business. And we're looking at a long wait to get to this point, long anticipated, with Laura Kelly placing the state's very first bet. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. Kansas became the 35th state to join the ranks of legal sports betting, with several others hot on our heels, perhaps leading to the quicker than expected start. Cake's Jackson Overstreet shows us how the rollout went.
Michael Catt is hoping to make some money. And what was your first bet you placed?
Notre Dame to beat Ohio State.
He is one of many Kansans taking advantage of the first day of sports betting here in the Sunflower State.
Oh, I'm excited. I've been waiting for years for Kansas to finally legalize it.
Thursday at noon, for the first time, anyone inside Kansas was able to bet on their favorite sports team. It's been a quick process to get everything up and running since sports wagering was legalized back in May. The Kansas Lottery making final approvals of retailers and a start date only in the last few weeks.
It's been a push to the very end to get our temporary retail space up and going, and it's beautiful, it's amazing.
Both FanDuel with Kansas Star Casino and DraftKings with Boot Hill Casino have their apps online and temporary sports books ready for bettors.
It does go away. It's exciting each and every time to open up in a new location.
Having everybody be so excited to have sports betting available in their state is something that we couldn't be more excited to do.
The first week of sports betting in Kansas is being called a soft launch by the state to allow for regulators, casinos, and retailers to get their feet underneath them. But so far, the day has been smooth, both for the casinos.
We've had a lot of guests who were timid but very curious.
And for bettors.
I think it just makes the games that more interesting. They're already fun to watch, but once you have a little money on the games, they're just that much more fun to watch.
So much to talk about there, and we're going to talk about a lot of it, plus many other things today. Joining us on the panel this week to talk about these topics and many others, we have Dr. Neil Allen, a political scientist from Wichita State University, and State Representative Casey O'Hibasam, Democrat. Sorry. We're going to be talking about the switching parties here in a bit, but you're not switching parties, Democrat from Wichita. Meanwhile, on my left, we have our Republican, see, I confused myself,
That's good.
Representative Stephen Owens from Heston, and David Seaton from the Cowley Courier Traveler. Thank you all so much for joining us. There's always been a question of just how much business sports betting could bring into Kansas. This soft open, does that kind of answer that question for us? The anticipation we've seen over the last week, how does that seem to be going, at least from what you guys are hearing? Stephen?
I mean, I haven't seen the numbers to see exactly what that looks like at this point, but I know a lot of people were really excited about it. There's been a pent-up demand there for what seems like a couple of years since the Supreme Court made the decision that they made. So if people want to do it, power to them. That's great.
Yeah. What about you, Casey? What are you hearing?
I have to concur with my good friend. I have to concur with him. Yes, there is a lot of excitement out there with respect to sports betting. Of course, we are, as a state, trying to catch up with other states as well. We don't want to fall behind with respect to the revenues that are coming in that will be generated. So a lot of people are excited about it. Again, I want to see the numbers. Of course, it just started. So therefore, I'd like to see some kind of continued growth. For us to make some kind of decision as to, whether it's actually a success, but I think it is so far. So far, I am very confident that it will actually take off once football season starts.
Which is not that far away. But David, as you look at this running a local newspaper, what are you hearing from your readers as far as this goes? Is it as popular outside of the metro areas as we're hearing here?
Well, I haven't heard much about it, frankly. The most I think I've heard about it is when I check YouTube, and I'm getting the commercials now for the sports bet companies. So not too much. What's fascinating to me is that now betting casinos is so accepted by the culture. I can remember maybe 15, 12 years ago when it was very controversial. Is Kansas going to open it up to gambling? And we worried about the social impacts and things like that. And now that's sort of thrown out the window for the economic value of it, and we don't hear much about people getting addicted to gambling and things. I think it's kind of fascinating how far we've come. Mm-hmm. And like you said, we're catching up to the rest of the country, just kind of a fact of our life and our culture now.
Yeah. And yet not everybody is happy with this. I know the Wyandotte tribe is saying that the state is not negotiating in good faith because it's upset about how the Wyandotte tribe was able to put the casino in Park City to begin with, and they're trying to get in on this. So it's something I think that isn't completely settled yet.
Well, I mean, also that we live in a strange kind of situation here in Kansas because we have the government is involved in operating casinos. We have a small number of casinos, I believe 4 that have state licenses. We have also a fairly small number of Native American casinos. That the Wyandotte tribe has a place, not too far from here that's in direct competition with another Wichita area casino, the Kansas Star, that the state has more of an interest in. And really, I think we ought to move closer to what like European countries do, which is gambling is something people do. It's a retail business, and you let people locate retail stores and have online connections where it makes sense, and then tax it. And but the mess of regulations involving whether a Native American tribe can have a casino and what kind of regulations has, and whether it's federal regulation or state regulation, is just a complication now. But I think we're on the train to basically where gambling is going to be something. It's going to be a service that people pay for like any other, and just hopefully, as a taxpayer in Kansas, that we keep the money that we get from it and use it for something besides helping the Chiefs to have more leverage to get more money from Missouri to build a new stadium.
No, tell us how you really feel, Neil.
I could do the same rap on the Royals too.
That's true. But I spoke with some folks from the Kansas Problem Gambling Task Force, and they're concerned that the introduction of sports gambling is going to be an issue, that we're going to see more people struggling with that, and that their funding is not anywhere near enough to match what we're already seeing in advertising from the gambling companies. You mentioned all the ads that you're seeing on YouTube there, David, but they, like the local task force, they say they've got an annual budget of about $68,000. About half of that goes to advertising to let people know they even exist.
Well, but there's a lot of funding that has been out there for them that simply hasn't been utilized. The demand actually hasn't been seen with other gambling, with our current casinos. And so there was a lot of conversation around this bill. There's a lot of people that didn't support this bill because of the way it was structured, because of certain amendments that were added to it, and the way it was. So certainly could be a concern. I think that needs to materialize and then would be addressed accordingly.
And I also want to add to Representative Owens as well. Of course, there were amendments that were added on, but at the same time, we can also go back to rework some of the errors that were made, for this past bill that we just passed. So I'm confident it's going to be okay. In terms of the funding issue, I think we can either allocate more or percentage-wise, we can do any of that. Again, we just need to study, find out where the problems are after this first year, second year, find out what's going on, then move forward.
So how effective would a new study be, Neil, as far as finding out how much of an issue problem gambling may be in Kansas?
Well, I mean, one thing we should remember is that sports betting is not beginning this week in Kansas. People have been betting on sports as long as there's been sports. I mean, one of the reasons I think it's good to legalize is because I'd rather have the somewhat organized government be involved in regulating instead of organized crime. But there's lots of people that do lots of betting on sports, and it's an addictive thing. I mean, gambling is addictive, and if you walk into a casino, they are designed to addict people so that they can then spend more money. Now, we have all kinds of other addictive things that are illegal: booze, cigarettes. In several states, certain kinds of drugs that are legal here in Kansas, and we should take that seriously. And just because gambling is connected to something that a lot of us do a lot of and enjoy, watching sports on television, doesn't mean it isn't an addictive thing. And also, I mean, I hear the same ads, and they all tell you in very entertaining language about how great it is to bet and all their $20 free stuff. And at the very end, they'll say, if you're a problem gambler, getting help is your best solution. But that's the kind of world we're living in, and hopefully we'll have less addicts and a lot more revenue.
Can I ask a question of our lawmakers? I'm curious if, since Kansas established casinos 10 years ago or so, if there's been any kind of comprehensive study about the social effects and if addiction has gone up, gambling addiction because of it. I mean, or is that being studied amid all this?
Looked at. It's something we've talked about in our appropriations committee as we look at the budget and where that comes from. I mean, it blows my mind the amount of money that people waste on gambling. And I say waste because to me, I'm not a gambler. I think it is a waste of money. For other people, it's important, it's entertainment, each to their own from that perspective. But we haven't seen that demand be driven to that phone line that warrants funds not being swept out of there, because through the lottery there's a certain percentage of money that goes right into that fund, and it generally gets swept every year because it's not even used.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly be talking about this for some time
Absolutely.
to come. So, turning to the governor's race, the COVID-19 pandemic created some of the toughest and most debated decisions ever for politicians. Now, those decisions are becoming a hot issue in the battle for the Kansas governor's office. KAKE's Eli Higgins shows us the punches the candidates are throwing even before their first debate.
It's the first string of attacks between Kansas Democratic Governor Laura Kelly and her 2022 Republican opponent, Derek Schmidt, each winning their primary election races by landslides. And it's already obvious what this year's general election will likely be all about.
Particularly Governor Kelly's anxiousness to be the first governor in the country to close all of our schools statewide when there were very few COVID cases.
Schmidt said this at a campaign event Monday. Governor Kelly quickly responded to the criticism at her event the next day.
First of all, I have to say it's really easy to armchair quarterback. You know, I was there when the pandemic hit, and we did what we thought we needed to do to protect the lives of Kansas families.
But Schmidt disagrees.
Demand for mental health services are up. Teachers are frustrated and stressed and strained, and in some cases leaving the profession in numbers that are unacceptable.
Something Kelly actually agrees with, but says her administration is doing everything it can to help.
We've also invested a lot of money to help kids with that learning loss. We recognize that it was real. It was a very difficult time for our kids, for our parents, for our teachers, and everyone.
And with all of this more than a week before the first gubernatorial debate even happens, it won't be the last of it. Eli Higgins, KAKE News on your side.
Meanwhile, the independent candidate for governor, Dennis Pyle, this week found himself defending his speeding defense. Body cam footage from the Brown County Sheriff's Office shows Pyle during a traffic stop on his way back from a late night at the Capitol during the legislative session. During the exchange, Pyle asked the officer if he's familiar with the state constitution. You can then hear him telling the officer the Kansas Constitution says lawmakers are not to be impeded traveling to or from the session. In the end, Pyle got a verbal warning. So let's start with the independent candidate, Dennis Pyle. We've heard this used in other cases as well. There's been a lot of question over whether or not this section of the state constitution kind of needs to be rewritten at this point. Neil?
Well, also, if a police officer is stopping you because you're speeding coming back from your job at the legislature, they're not impeding you from doing your job. You don't need to speed home from your job in order to do your job. And I mean, at least Senator Pyle, was not intoxicated going the wrong direction down an interstate in Topeka like Senator Suellentrop was, and from what we've learned, didn't challenge the police officer to a fight and call him Donut Boy. So that's a positive. But also, I mean, this is a negative, I think, for people looking at him as a potential leader, because if you're going to have that responsibility, then you shouldn't abuse it to say that the police shouldn't stop you for speeding. And I mean, impeding the legislature from doing its job is the kind of thing like, for example, if Representative Obhabas, I'm sorry if I got the, if he and his allies were going to have a vote in the legislature and he knew that Representative Owens was likely going to oppose them, he shouldn't be able to get the state police to run a bunch of checkpoints to slow down the representative from getting back to vote. That's one thing. But this is just a case of somebody with power and privilege trying to use it to have different rules apply to them.
Which is unacceptable on every single level. And I think that's what people failed to realize, or that some people that have been in power maybe too long get in their head that they're somehow invincible to the laws. The reality is we're tax-paying, law-abiding citizens, and we need to be held to that exact same standard. There's no special privilege that comes because the majority of the folks in our district elected us. Own your choices. You chose to speed. Own the consequences and move on. Personally, I choose not to validate him as a viable candidate because the reality is we know he's not. All he does is stand to inhibit Derek's chance of getting elected, in my opinion.
Well, Casey, would you care to respond?
Well, of course, the Constitution guarantees everyone the right to run for any office. So if somebody has the signatures, the support to actually run for any office, whether it's Attorney General, Governor, they should have that right. Now, he believes, Senator Pye believes that he has something to offer or a message to give to the Kansas people, then he should be allowed to, offer his message. Yes, we may disagree on certain policies that he's voted on, and of course, in the Senate, he has butted heads with leadership, and that is a fact. But end of the day, he has a right, just like everyone else, to.
Certainly has a right, but the viability is something totally different.
All right.
And also that makes sense for your party to be concerned about him.
Sure.
And also, I mean, he's not going to be the next governor, but if a voter wants to register their position that Derek Schmidt is insufficiently conservative for their values, then a message vote for Senator Pyle is a way they can go.
I just hope that they look at his voting record and realize that he's not conservative.
Okay. We also have other candidates to talk about. So we're going to move on because we do have to get.
We do have opinions.
Yes. We have other candidates to talk about. We've got Derek Schmidt and Laura Kelly discussing the handling of the pandemic. And David, really much of a surprise there that this is kind of the first issue that's coming up. It's still something that people talk about, though maybe not in the same way they did 2 years ago.
No, I don't think it's a surprise. I think, Derek Schmidt he's trying to define, Governor Kelly, and I think the phrase is "lockdown Laura" is what he's going to start using. In fact, they published a website today and sent it out to the media, saying that "lockdown Laura" website is available, and they've released all these economic data saying that Kansas isn't doing well economically. Of course, she's got her data that shows that we are doing, better. And so I think it's interesting that, we're sort of fighting the past a little bit here because he's going back to the pandemic. She's going back to the Brownback administration, which was a while ago, so they're battling out kind of historically here. It's fascinating because Governor Kelly is, she's running on her economic platform, prosperity on the plains, the Panasonic deal in northeast Kansas. It seems like every day she's sending out press releases going to a new business opening. We get our inbox gets filled, as journalists with what she's doing. But Schmidt is trying to go right after on the economic front now too. And I think the pandemic with the shutdowns and all the problems that it caused for people is kind of right in that arena.
Yeah. Well, talking about all of those issues, we do know that there are some folks who are going to vote on how they think, not how the candidates think, and that's leading some endorsements to maybe not come out the way we've been expecting. And it's in touching the race for Attorney General as well, as both the race for Attorney General and the race for Governor. It took kind of a surprising twist this week with Chris Kobach continuing to announce the expected endorsements from within the Republican establishment, but one Republican crossing the street with his support. The Kansas City Star broke the news that former federal prosecutor Stephen McAllister would be backing Laura Kelly over Derek Schmidt in the race for governor. The next day, he announced he was also endorsing Chris Mann over Chris Kobach. Why did the Trump appointee switch sides? McAllister said for him, the breaking point was when Schmidt and Kobach backed efforts to overturn the 2022 presidential election results. Quote, "I just in good conscience didn't feel like I could," he told the Star about supporting Schmidt. In a news release from Mann's campaign, he said, "The primary duty of the Attorney General's office is to keep Kansans safe and to protect their interests." Chris Kobach already has made clear in his campaign promises that, just as he did with the Secretary of State's office, he will use the Attorney General's office to pursue a purely political agenda. Chris Mann understands the Attorney General's fundamental duties to serve and protect. All right, so what impact does this have on either of these races? Neil, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, as far as McAllister's endorsement, I would say probably very little. Because I don't think, the U.S. Attorney is a tremendously important person, but it's one that most voters don't necessarily know about, and occasionally runs for office, like in a state like Kansas, when the Democrats don't elect statewide officials too often. Sometimes, we had someone consider running for Senate last time who was a U.S. attorney. But I think McAllister is the kind of voter that really is up for grabs, and someone who has professional occupation and might lean toward the Republican Party, but especially in the Attorney General race, might not be comfortable with Chris Kobach as a candidate. And frankly, if Chris Mann was running against any other Republican, I don't think this race would be worth talking about because it'd be a blowout. But Chris Kobach is uniquely toxic, and also, it's not that he would be purely political, it's about what ideas drive him, which is basically that people that are not like him need to be excluded from our political process, and we need to spend lots of time looking for immigrants that are taking away jobs and taking away votes, when in reality, Kobach spent 8 years as the Secretary of State and did very little except get this state negative press and to have problems keeping his law license.
David, what do you think?
It's interesting that the Kelly campaign is, they've got sort of Brownback and Kobach. They're trying to tie that around Schmidt's collar, and there'll probably be some success with that. I agree that this particular endorsement probably doesn't mean a whole lot. There might be a subset of people that are paying attention to it. I think Schmidt's a fascinating character. When he was in the Senate, he was kind of considered a moderate, sort of conservative, but in the middle on certain issues like education and transportation funding and things like that. And then since he became Attorney General, I think he's really had to try to figure out where his position is, and he's had to stake out these more conservative positions to run for governor, as our political climate has changed so much, as both parties has sort of become more absolutist in their beliefs. And so I think he's probably struggling a little bit to figure out, the right tact. Today, another press release we saw, he was using the word, talking about wokeism, about a court case about teachers not being able to say the right pronouns, or I can't remember all the details, but so he's sort of trying to get into the culture wars a little bit, but I don't think he's comfortable there. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah. We definitely have seen him kind of move to the right a little bit over the last few years, Stephen.
It's kind of what we've seen Laura Kelly do over the last year, too, is move back to the middle, right?
Yeah.
Because there for her first 3 years, she was very far to the left in her decision-making and her desires to shut down schools, shut down churches, pretty much shut down the state's economy. But what we saw last year was this shift back to middle, voting to support sanctuary cities, voting for some of those regulations on her executive authority during a pandemic. It's important to note, because we talked about this shutdown, that was an executive branch decision. Even though the legislature was in session, we were never consulted or put to a vote on whether we believe schools should be shut down.
All right, Casey, quickly.
I would just want to first of all say that, look, Governor Kelly actually did what was in the best interest of the people of Kansas, and that was basically protect the lives. Again, we were faced with a virus that was very deadly. She got consultation with her advisors, her medical advisors, as to the best route to take in order to combat this particular virus. There was no vaccine available. There were a lot of people who were still in denial indicating that the coronavirus was not a real issue, but it was. So she did the best thing in her interest to actually help the people of Kansas, protect lives and to move our state forward. And again, she was not the cause of this particular pandemic. She's not the cause of it. It actually came, from somewhere else that, we were trying to figure out how to actually solve it.
Okay. Well, moving on, the Wichita Firefighters Union is one step closer to securing better pay in an agreement with the city that the union president called historic and life-changing in a tweet. KAKE's Maeve Ashbrook takes a look at why.
When we finalized the deal on Tuesday with the pay package, everybody was super excited. We came back here and celebrated.
It's not a quiet compromise.
It still doesn't get us all the way up to being the highest paid department in the state, but it's a compromise, so we're happy with it.
The Wichita Firefighters Union, Local 135, and the City of Wichita have come to an agreement on a pay package for their new contract. The union wants better pay.
We were losing people at a great number. We hope to be compensated fairly and just be able to provide for our families.
Between planning and contract negotiations, Vice President Dustin Winters says the union is 11 months into the process, making its voice heard at rallies like this one in June.
It goes to the hard work that our firefighters did to not only their own job fighting fires and keeping our community safe, but actually talking to elected officials.
Union leaders say support from Mayor Brandon Whipple and 3 city council members played a big part in Tuesday's decision.
It's the best contract, according to them, that they've had since 1918, so in over 100 years.
Its current contract expires in December, and while the pay package is finalized, the new contract isn't done yet.
We still have a lot of language issues that we're working on, drug testing policies and things like that.
But the union says it's a positive step forward.
I am 100% sure that our membership will be happy with the contracts.
All right. And this deal came out as Gallup released new polling data this week showing labor unions are the most popular they've been nationwide since 1965, with 71% now approving of the organizations, up from just 48% a little over a decade ago. And that's quite a climb, perhaps part of the worker shortage that we've been dealing with.
Well, yes, and also, I mean, the American labor movement has had some successes in recent years. I mean, we have a Starbucks organized in this city, although a Starbucks that has organized itself and made its own union because they didn't want to join up with national unions, which is interesting. In this case, I think really we see the importance of political activity by labor unions. I mean, the firefighters were huge supporters of liberal city council candidates who ran in the last election, and also were large supporters of Mayor Whipple, and I think they're probably going to be large supporters as he runs for re-election. And for a Democrat, I mean, firefighters and police unions are really good unions to have because they're much more popular than, frankly, unions representing just regular old public sector workers like me as a college professor.
Yeah. All right. Well, that'll definitely be something we'll have to wait and see how it turns out over the next few months and years. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, the Wichita Eagle, and KAKE News for sharing their materials with us. For now, stay safe and have a great week.